Well, I need everything working for me if I'm going to get the leatherettes off the base of the camera, so I'm removing what obstructions I can deal with. Just going to take off the button from the back catch, release button, just unscrewed that. That's its return spring there, and that button, I unscrewed that. I got it started with this pair of crimp lock pliers and used this pin vise to unscrew it. The rewind button, I'll take that off too. I want these obstructions off because they may get in my way of trying to get underneath the leatherette with my scalpel. Okay. I'm going to try putting a drop of naphtha on my scalpel blade. See if that'll help me get that in under the edges here easier. Can't say that's making an awful lot of difference. So with leatherettes, given that they're fragile and would have always been fragile, is it likely that the manufacturer intended that they come off easily for service? Or did they always intend that they would be replaced when the camera was being serviced? Yeah, that leatherette's breaking up there. I don't have the answer to that question. I think an indication of how they were viewed would be the quantities that the parts were sold in. Yeah, that leatherette's not behaving nicely at all. That's really glued down. That's if the leatherettes were sold individually, if a repairer would purchase one leatherette, say one base leatherette, or whether they were sold 5 at a time, that would give me an indication that they were intended to be replaced frequently if they were sold 5 at a time. And I know a lot of parts were sold like that. Well, about the only thing I can say about this is it's fortunate this is on the base of the camera, not the top or the front. I know in other parts of the world you've probably been dealing with this COVID problem for a long time. It's still relatively novel for us. I was out earlier today sending a couple of cameras back to their owners, and the post office was deserted. There was just the staff there and no one else. Extremely unusual. Things are very quiet here. Of course, areas like this are hard to deal with because you can't get your scalpel down underneath there very easily. Can't get it at the right angle. The naphtha I'm using here won't soften the adhesive. It makes no difference to the adhesive, but it sort of lubricates the scalpel blade and allows me to scrape it down to the casting easier. I don't dare overdo it because the Leatherettes never enjoy solvent of any sort. If I can get it past that boss, it'll work a bit easier. Just looking at my scalpel blade to see whether the bevel of the grind on them was different on one side than the other, but it doesn't appear that that's the case. Well, the battery's just about flat in this video camera, and you're probably about in the same state from watching this. I'll bring you back once I've got the leatherette off. Well, I'm still plodding away getting this leatherette off. It's probably 10 minutes more work gone in it than last time you saw me. I'm getting down to the end now. It might go quicker at this point. It appears to be. And that's because this is over chromed brass. And as I said earlier, the adhesive often acts differently over different substrates. In my experience, it's this leatherette, this adhesive, is usually easier to get off chromed brass than it is getting off nickel plated steel, and it's easier getting it off the nickel plated steel than it is off the aluminium body. Now, whether that's because of the surface finish of the different metals, or whether it's some chemical interaction of those metals with the adhesive, I don't know. That's it. Okay, so I've got my leatherette off. I've got a tiny void at the end, and the surface finish is probably not marvellous, but it's pretty good. And regardless of that, it needed to come off so that I can service the camera. So it was a casualty of war. Now, the screws on this tripod socket are loose. In this one, the screws are not rusty. So this camera had not been treated as its mate had. It had not been put down somewhere damp. And for our purposes, it would have been better if it had, because a little bit of corrosion under the leatherettes makes it much easier to get them loose. Okay, so to carry on here, I'll just unhook the spring from that back film, the rewind button catch. I've got the first batch of parts back from cleaning. They're sitting there waiting to be reassembled into the camera body. Of course, I haven't cleaned the camera body yet, so that's not going to happen immediately. But as soon as I've got this lot apart, I can get this lot into the cleaner. This is very sticky. The grease on this is very tacky. There's the take-up spool. The metal bush in the bottom of the take-up spool that needs to be cleaned. The sprocket shaft, let's have that out. Single screw. The sprocket shaft out, the bush from the top of the film advance, and the clutch. Yeah, again, that's quite stiff, that clutch. What's that? Oh, that's the shutter. That's our retaining ring. Let's have the door off the front. 2 screws. and the disposition of the washers. There's one there that is stuck there somehow. I'm not sure what's going on there. It's almost like it's glued in place. The one at the top shows no similar problem. Oh well, we'll deal with that later. Let's have this stuff off so I can get these parts into the ultrasonic cleaner. And tomorrow, because it's going to, won't be ready to start the reassembly until tomorrow probably. Tomorrow I'll be able to get stuck straight in and reassemble both cameras. Have a bit of luck. Right, so this door, again I'm following the same procedure. I'm checking the point at which the inner and outer helical are level. Run 2 scribe lines across the bottom and 1 across the top. That allows me immediately to see that I've got the helicals in correctly. If you put the helicals in up the other way, you may well find that the action's very stiff, because the posts, the guide posts, are adjustable. The guide posts that stop the inner helical from rotating force it to move forwards and backwards. Those guide posts are adjustable, and if they're adjusted nicely for one orientation of the mechanism, they're unlikely to also be adjusted correctly for the other orientation, and that is often the case. So if you put the helical in upside down, you'll find that the action is stiff. In extreme cases it won't even move at all. Take those 4 black screws out. As with the other camera, this is all quite sticky with grease. I'll have to put the back catch in place fairly quickly with this camera, because it's annoying me no end the way that the back door is not clipped into position. But removing that button certainly made it easier for me to get under the leatherettes. Right. That's very sticky. And where we were with the other camera not long ago. See if the screws will come loose by themselves first. They will. Must have seen me beating the other camera to death and decided to give in gracefully. No, not today. The transfer shaft, a bit of the felt has come away from the back there. We'll have to peel that off there and glue it back. Let's get that sleeve out of there. very greasy. I'm just looking at the state of that. Sometimes that's loose. That sleeve is a riveted construction. This crossbar is held by the end of the tube being riveted over it. Sometimes that's loose, where cameras have been abused, where the shutter release button's been hammered in, for example. It can loosen that. Right, let's get this apart. Cover those springs, recover the buttons. Now here we have a difference from the other camera. Here you can see there's a brass plate under here, which was almost certainly done to reduce the friction. So it's present on earlier cameras, but later cameras they dispensed with it. Most likely because somebody said, well, actually that's probably a waste of time and it doesn't actually do anything. Let's reduce our component count and just not do it. So there I've got this one all apart. And these parts I will rush away and get them in the ultrasonic cleaner in some wax and grease remover first, to be followed up by domestic detergent. Right. Back to camera number one. The parts are all back from the ultrasonic cleaner. Everything nice and clean. It means I can inspect things, particularly with a view to looking at that cocking rack to decide whether that was going to be a problem or not. Now that I've got it clean, it doesn't look like there's a particular issue there. Well, I'll check that more closely as I get to assemble it, and hopefully everything will work well. But first of all, I've got to clean these body components that I haven't cleaned yet. And this is virtually all just a case of cleaning everything with Naphtha, which is cigarette lighter fluid, roncinol, similar stuff to that. Though a little bird tells me that roncinol, the formulation has changed. I heard that it had been taken over by the Zippo company, or the parent company of Zippo, and that it's not all pure naphtha now. So you may have to shop around. I don't know what the other component is, probably something that burns a lot dirtier, kerosene or something. So I will clean up these components. So that everything can be reassembled. Now none of this is particularly dirty. There's a lot of grease about. But you can probably see from the colour of that it's clean, tired old grease, if you like. Not dirty, tired old grease. If the mechanism had been incredibly well used, that would all be black with dust, metal and similar contaminants. The fact that it's pretty colourless, or it's just got the yellow colour that you'd expect with new grease, means that basically the camera's never done a lot. That it's been treated nicely, not left in dirty, dark, dusty places, and as a result its faults are probably all the faults that you get from old age, arthritis, things like that. broad flat surfaces like this, where that piece, that finger for the shutter release runs, if that's sticky with grease, those broad flat surfaces there, things stick together very well. So I normally lubricate an area like that with graphite powder. I found that the best because graphite powder never ever goes sticky. You can see a bit more colour in the dirt coming out there. That's our focus scale ring, of course. Now, one indicator of whether a camera's had a lot of hard use is this knurled wheel here, the focus wheel, that knob. Now, those knurls are quite sharp, and because they're quite sharp, they act like a file. They'll gather up your skin cells and oil and other rubbish, and if that knurled edge is packed up with dirt and grease, then it's a sign that the camera's seen a lot of use. If the knurling is bright and shiny and nice clean bluish looking chrome, then that's a good sign that the camera has done very little work at all, if any. Areas of the metalwork that see a lot of contact with your hands tend to get marked up fairly promptly, whether by scratches from rings, things like that, or by just discoloration from skin oils and perspiration that will etch into the surface, or just leave a dirty deposit on there. Just looking at the state of this. Now, this will be nickel plated steel, possibly that plate, no, nickel plated brass. There's a tiny patch of corrosion just there. That's unusual. It suggests to me a drop of moisture probably got in there at some stage and sat on that surface. So here I'm just removing any old grease from inside this shroud. And it makes a pleasant change to be dealing with removing clean old grease instead of removing a greasy grinding paste of sand and dried grease that I'm often finding in a place like this. Most of these surfaces in here come in contact with nothing, so as a result, of course, they are not a friction surface, and if they're not a friction surface, they don't need to be greased. But you often find that the grease is spread over everything. Now, there's no reason to believe people put grease over everything, but the grease is just migrated there over time. Right, that looks good. Let's have a look at this body. Here you can see that the grease here is yellow. It's quite sticky. It's dried out, but it's yellow. It's its original colour, or probably something like its original colour. It's not black, which means it's not filled with dust and ground up metal paste. That means that even though the mechanism wasn't moving smoothly because things were sticky, the mechanism isn't worn out. And so once it's cleaned and components are lubricated appropriately, it should go back to working like a fairly new camera, you could say. New in terms of how much work it's done, not necessarily new in terms of years. At the top of the camera, see, I'm struggling to get any dirt on this. There just isn't much. This camera is very clean. Inside the camera, well, there's not much to show there either. That all looks pretty good. That'll need to be brushed out with a dry paintbrush, blown out, but there's really nothing there to move. Now this rubbish on the base, that's adhesive and leatherette, the backing of the leatherette. I'll get that off with a bit of solvent right now.